Without further ado, welcome you, Ken. Thank you for a start for coming to be with us. I know you've just returned from being in Asia in the last week. You were with us last night for the Prime Minister's speech. You've had the advantage of hearing an opposition view this morning. We have the advantage that you and members of your Secretariat are spending the whole day with us, and so you might also give us some reflective remarks at the end of the day when you've heard various views. Where do we start from your perspective going forward?
Good heavens, are we going to start with that? I would like to come to this. I have only one chart to present to you this morning, and it's a framework for thinking about some issues that we, in preparing the white paper, are working our way through. Don't look at that chart at the moment, it'll send you mad. And I will do my best to explain it to you. Where do we start? Maybe I could say a little bit about where the process is up to. We have consulted very widely. All of you would be aware that the task force published an issues paper just before Christmas. We've had 250 thereabouts, very thoughtful written submissions in response to the issues raised in that paper. We have met face-to-face, I've met face-to-face with hundreds of people now to discuss the issues that we're grappling with. Most of the people that I've met with have been in Australia, but it's true, as Steve has indicated, that I've with Megan, and many of you would have met Megan Quinn last night, who's leading the group of officials, about 14 of them, who are working full-time on drafting the white paper. We've been travelling quite a bit through Asia, not as extensively as I would have liked, but this project, as you're all aware, has a tight timeline. We've spoken to very good people in Indonesia, in Singapore, in India, in Japan, and in China. And we were indeed in Japan and China last week. We're now at the point of certainly distilling or synthesising the views that have been put to us, and we want to, as much as possible, project back to the community through at least our draft of the white paper, a synthesis of views that have been put to us. We didn't want to sit in a room and draft this document in the abstract, firstly because we didn't have the expertise to be able to do that, but secondly because this white paper, at least from our perspective, has to be a document that speaks to the Australian people about who they are, what Australia is. It's very important, therefore, that it reflect back to people their sense of themselves, not in a challenging way. We hope that it's not challenging, but rather in a way that people feel comfortable with. If I can just briefly go to this schematic, and I could spend hours on this schematic, I will not. The reason that we have this schematic is that in synthesising everything that we've heard, we've been asking ourselves the question, what are the sources of opportunity for Australia in the Asian century? And right at the bottom of this triangle, we have a set of endowments, let's call them that, national endowments. Some of the endowments that Australia has are natural endowments. They've been here for a very long time, and importantly, among our natural endowments, we would list our geography, that is our physical location, where we are in the world, and also our abundant natural resources. Today, it's taken for granted that these things are a source of success for Australia. 10 years ago, these things were seen as a source of disadvantage for Australia. People tend to forget this. Even 10 years ago, it was 12 years ago, when Bill Gates came out to Australia, he described Australia as an old economy, distant from the world. 10, 12 years ago, he was able to say that because Australia was a natural resource producer. We were not producing chips for computers. We were not seen as being significant players in the production of information and communication technologies. Secondly, we were a long way from Silicon Valley, and we were a long way from Europe. Even 10, 12 years ago, people in Australia seriously used to talk about Asia as a place that you fly over on your way to the big commercial centres of Europe and the United States. It's amazing how quickly things have changed, but things have now been turned completely on their heads. And so today, we see our geography and our abundant natural resources as being sources of advantage, not sources of disadvantage. Things have changed. In addition, though, to the natural endowments, the natural resources, which features strongly these days in our endowments, there's a body of created endowments, which a lot of people tend also to take for granted or not even to be aware of, really. These are the things that previous generations of Australians, but also the current generation of Australians, have created that give Australia a source of opportunity in the future. So I'm talking about things like our strong institutions, things like an independent central bank, which these days we take for granted, but many countries could only dream of, or that is, officials in many countries could only dream of. The rule of law, very, very low levels of corruption in Australia. These things that we take for granted are things that have been built up in Australia over many, many generations, and they too should be seen these days as an endowment, if you like to think of it as a legacy left to the current generation by future generations of Australians. And those are our strong endowments then, but to convert those endowments into opportunity, we need capabilities. We need, and I won't go through this in any detail at all, I'll simply say, and you can see it on the schematic, there's a set of foundational capabilities that are needed to transform endowments into real opportunity. And then there's a set of individual firm and sector capabilities, and it's really in that area of individual firm and sector capabilities that we in the task force are thinking about this concept that the Prime Minister referred to last night of Asia-relevant capabilities. At the level of the individual, at the level of the firm, at the level of the sector in the Australian economy or in the Australian community generally. Do individuals, do firms, do sectors have the capabilities that are relevant to the Asian century? That is, do they have the capabilities that will allow them to integrate into and make the most of the opportunities in the Asian century? That's where we're at in our thinking. We haven't drafted the report yet.
Well, that's why it's such a wonderful thing to be together in this very serious and purposeful meeting today. I think Dr. Ian Watt, the Secretary of the Prime Minister's Department, and I know you and Ian talk to each other often, was telling me recently that his hope, which you've just landed on, is that when we talk about Australia and the Asian century in the white paper, a conclusion many people draw quickly is it's about what happens out there. But in fact, where you've landed, Ken, is substantially this is about what we need to do and transform as Australians, both individually and collectively.
Absolutely. A lot of people have said, and it's true, that we find ourselves in the right place at the right time. But one shouldn't be complacent about this. We should take nothing for granted. And the fact that our geography and that our natural endowments these days can be seen as a source of advantage for us means nothing unless we do what's required domestically to ensure that we can take advantage of those opportunities. And that's really what those capabilities on the schematic are about. We're thinking very deeply through these sets of capabilities, the foundational capabilities, which we see as being a shared responsibility, by the way, between government and individual. And then the individual firm and sector capabilities, and again there's a sharing of responsibilities, although obviously as you get to the top of this triangle, more of the responsibility for developing capability is the level of the individual. But the point is, most of what is needed for Australia to make the most of the Asian century will involve doing things here, doing things in Australia, and certainly not taking for granted the emerging commercial and other opportunities in the region.
So Ken, you have an important job in chairing this. I think the Prime Minister even said no pressure last night. And if you were talking to just the public, I love how you say it's the Australians. It's actually not a white paper that says Australia's future. It's the Australians. So I'm going to get personal. What's your personal thoughts of, I prefer to be hopeful than fearful. So optimistically, social or economic opportunities, what are a couple of those that you personally feel are our future?
I think actually the thing that's been most striking about the consultations that we've undertaken is how often people that we've spoken to, both here in Australia and outside of Australia, how often they've emphasised the importance of people-to-people links. How often they've emphasised the importance of high-quality people-to-people relationships. In many ways. Firstly, the importance of developing strong people-to-people relationships if business people, Australian business people, are going to be successful in Asia. And by the way, that doesn't mean necessarily sitting in Australia and exporting product into Asia. And in fact, for many Australian businesses, if that is their mindset, the mindset's going to have to change. They're going to have to get out there. They're going to have to find opportunities as part of global or regional supply chains in Asia by having a presence on the ground in countries within Asia to our north and also to our west, of course, in India. And to do that, they're going to need high-quality people-to-people relationships. So that statement has come through many times. But more importantly, and to your question, what has really struck me is how much enjoyment people derive out of those relationships. You know, it's clear that it's for many people, it's really a mind-expanding experience to have a strong personal relationship with somebody of a different culture, whose first language is a different language, but is living in a part of the world that we also live in. And so somebody that you can have a conversation with about the big issues in the world because they're likely to see the issues in a similar way, but somebody who comes from a different culture, speaks a different language, and this sense of enjoyment that is obvious among Australians that I've been talking to. It's equally obvious among those in Indonesia that I've spoken to, who speak very, very favourably, very warmly about their close personal friendships with people in Australia, and that's Indonesian politicians, that's Indonesian academics, that's Indonesian business people. It's people in Indonesia who are engaged in science, in culture, including the arts and literature and so on. It's very broadly based, and they speak very warmly about their personal friendships with people in Australia. Of course, everybody mentions the Colombo Plan, and that should be seen as a strong endowment that Australia has. The fact that it was really by chance, I think it was really by chance, not entirely by chance, that Australia developed the Colombo Plan in the way that it did. It's interesting that it's not so well understood, it's not so well known that these days on scholarships for international students, the Australian government spends $200 million a year. It vastly outweighs anything that was ever done under the Colombo Plan. But what that tells me is there's something missing. There was something in the way that the Colombo Plan was structured, and it was structured very much about people-to-people relationships. There's something about that that is missing in our current programs, and this is something that we're looking at. That's been actually the most striking thing for me, is the people-to-people relationships and how much enjoyment people have.
Thank you, Ken.
Now, you wouldn't believe this, but our time has already expired. I could keep going. I could see you hear a pin drop in this room. Ken, you'll be here and not only speaking to us at the end of the day, but willingly networking and talking to people during the breaks. There's an opportunity to express your own view to Ken and Megan Quinn and members of the Secretariat who are here. But what a great opening stanza to take it from the high rhetoric to where we go from here in a practical sense of putting this white paper together in coming months. And our opportunity as citizens of both Australia and the world, Asia and the world, who are here, to work with Dr. Ken Henry. Would you please join me in thanking Ken Henry?